I'm Prasanta Chakrabarty. I'm a professor and curator over at LSU, and I'm also the chair for science communication. And we do Science Cafe so that we can tell our community in Baton Rouge and abroad, wherever, that we're doing innovative stuff at LSU, right? This is a time where people don't really know what's going on in the sciences, and that's why it's being cut. Right? So we want to make sure that we have an informed public, and that's you guys. How many of you are not at all affiliated with LSU? Good. Bring more people. Learn about the cool, interesting science that we do by coming to Science Cafe, and I've been having this PowerPoint up that shows other things that we do. So glad that you are all here. So tonight's event will be held in partnership with the local public radio station. How many of you heard about us on RKF? Yeah? All right. How many of you are sponsors or donate to WRKF? Great. Even more so. Great music, sad news. So our sponsor is also Campus Federal Credit Union. And so here to say a few words. Federal Union is the best. They are the best. And to learn more about it, we'll bring up Zaki Solomon to tell you about it.
All right, what's up, y'all? How y'all doing tonight? My name is Zaki Solomon. I'm with Campus Federal Credit Union, like he was saying. We are a sponsor for this wonderful event. We come here every month. It's usually me that's always here. I like seeing everybody. I usually see some of the same people every month, but I do see some different people. So who's first Science Cafe tonight by show of hands? So a couple of people, cool. Some things that we're passionate about at Campus Federal is community, science, and keeping people dry during Louisiana rainstorms. So one thing that we do every time is we give away a Campus Federal umbrella. So Miss Holly Caruth is waving it. So one of you lucky people will be getting the coveted Campus Federal umbrella at the end of the night. So good luck to everybody. Does anybody, who has a Campus Federal umbrella in here? I'm sure a good bit of people do. A couple of people do. All right. Well, I do have a table outside, and I have a lot of information. The topic tonight, I know, talks about ancient times. So one interesting fun fact about me that has to do with ancient times is that I am half Egyptian. So if you want to learn about banking, checking accounts, savings accounts, CDs, or what it's like to go to the top of the Pyramid of Giza, come and see me at the table. So just thought I'd mention that. But thank y'all so much for coming. Without y'all, this would not be possible. So thank y'all so much. Appreciate it.
I went to the pyramids at Giza 2 years ago, and if you try to climb the pyramids, they will arrest you. So they used to let you go up. And now for tonight's talk, it's from David Chicoine, as I say, because he's from Quebec, which helped win the election for the Liberal Party yesterday. He's the H.W.G. Haig Professor of Archaeology in the Department of Geography, and Anthropology. And it will share 20 years of archaeological field research comparing different forms of community arrangements and how those shape people's daily lives in urban life settings. His findings might help us better understand ourselves and imagine alternatives forms of existence. He will talk about his research regarding how people build and move to cities for various reasons, often to seek opportunities, proximity, and security. Times of armed conflict can also lead to spontaneous urban nucleation and rural exodus. So help me bring up David Chicoine. David.
All right. Well, good evening. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Before we get going, thanks, Pro, for the wonderful introduction. Thank you also to Holly Caruth, And Elsa Hahn, I don't know if she's here, but for the help in organizing, thank you so much. I do hope that I don't fall off the stage, but I might kind of move around a little bit. So I'm an archaeologist. You could say I'm the garbage picker of the universe. So today we'll be talking about trash and architectural trash, ruined spaces, pottery, fragments. I'll try to anchor it in the idea of urbanism. Despite the grim title, this is not hopefully a depressing talk. It's a hopeful talk. I will focus on a time period that I've been studying for, as Pro said, maybe about 20 years, which is a period that is called the Early Horizon period in coastal Peru. It's a period that follows the disintegration of perhaps the first global pan-Andean phenomenon that we call the Chavin sphere of interaction, right? So I'll be talking about a period of maybe 4 or 5 centuries when people nucleated, especially at a site called Kailan. Now, to tailor it to a broader audience, of course, historical scientists, we often think, what is history good for? And we can go dig in many quotes from George Santayana, Winston Churchill, George Orwell, those that don't know the past are condemned to repeat it. Who controls the past, control the future. The longer I know the past, the further ahead I can see. I'll keep it anchored within archaeology. Maybe some of you have heard of these recent books that came out, written by anthropologists and archaeologists, that try to leverage non-Western cultures, whether in the deep past or in the less deep past, to try to tackle some world problems that we have today, or issues, better said, whether it's urbanism or climate change or pandemics or increasing wealth disparities, cybersecurity, etc. Now, I pulled one quote from Justin Jennings' book that I think try to embody the spirit of what I'm trying to say today, but I'm not as eloquent as him, so I highly recommend that you go read his book. Justin Jennings is an American-born archaeologist who works in South America. He's currently the curator of the Americas at the Royal Ontario Museum. And what he's basically offering us is a look into non-Western ways of doing things to expand our imagination. Now, his book is mostly about governance, global governance. I'll talk a bit more about urbanism and urban crowding, etc. All right, so I'll be focusing on one site. Time is short. The site is called Kailan. It's occupied roughly between 600, as I said, and 200 BC during a period we call the Early Horizon. Locally, we have different phases in archaeology that you shouldn't bother about. But we are on the western edge of South America in the desert coast of Peru in a valley called Nepeña. And here's an aerial or satellite image of Kailan. You see all the little black lines or stone walls. And in 2009, our team in Peru was the first to actually excavate at this site. It was known for a very long time, but nobody had excavated there. Let's see. All right. So there's many, many sites in that valley that we don't have time to talk about today. I want to draw your attention, in addition to Kailan, to 2 other sites that I hope will exemplify what is going on in the century before Kailan. And those sites are Cerro Blanco and Huaca Partida. And they're located just a few kilometers from Kailan. They're in what would be cultivated field areas. They're in even the floodplain, if you wish, marshlands. And these sites are, at least one of them was better known because, as you can see in the black and white photo here, in the center, there's a very famous person called Julio C. Tello, who's the father of Peruvian archaeology, who went there in the 1930s and cleared a series of polychrome murals that adorned the walls of a temple. And based on stylistic similarities, and since then, carbon dates, etc., we know that this site was a Chavin-related pilgrimage center, or if you want, large temple. So it does have the shape of a U. So if you we'll use our imagination a lot, it's archaeology, but there is a U here, right, that is encircling a huge plaza. So these Chavin sites, they're basically huge party venues for people to visit from all over the Andes. And the size of their plaza well exceed, we think, the resident population locally, right? What I'll talk about at Kailan is the radical opposite of this. People enclosing those space to tailor to their own resident population. Right, the other key site here is Huaca Partida. It's been excavated recently by a Japanese Peruvian team. This one, because it's been excavated more recently with more recent methods, we know a bit more about it. These are some of the spectacular polychrome friezes that depict that Chavin iconography. It's all about predators, supernatural human that become caiman, anacondas, eagles, snakes. Felines are the big thing. They're all about jaguars and pumas. All right, so Kailan. So Kailan, like any site in coastal Peru, like any site in the world, is partially destroyed. So what we have left is about 90 hectares of a dense urban core that we see here, the drone kind of flying around. Again, nobody had really worked there, so we were the first one mapping it. We first mapped it with a total station. So one of those things you see on the side of the road on a tripod. So we walked around with a prism pole, and we took 25,000 points to map Kailan, which gave us a map that looks like this. So people, of course, I'll leave it there for the mapping. By mapping it pedestrian or on foot, we were able to notice where the entrances were, so we're able to actually get an idea of how people got around. We're able to identify streets, which you see here in red. We're able to identify that the site was organized around 2 cross-cutting streets that probably delimited 4 quadrants, and then from these streets you had access to other streets in a kind of a hub and spoke, not a grid system, right? So once you were into one street, you might have been led to, deeper in the city, right? All right, so yeah, the blue dots are where we did test units. So these are small excavations. And the kind of charcoal squares are where we did block excavations. Those are larger excavations. Now we sampled around 560 square meters, which is a lot when you think about it, but it's also very little. So it's about 0.6% of the urban area. So everything I'll say today is based on that tiny sampling, right? If we were to excavate, 3 times as this, we might have very different idea. We still found a bunch of organic remains that allowed us to do carbon dating on at least 30 samples. We collected close to 50,000 pottery sherds, all that trash. And we also mapped the surface scatters of stuff, right? And the surface scatters of stuff told us where things happen, even though we don't see buildings left. So we know that the settlement extended beyond the urban core. There was probably a periphery based on surface groundstones, for instance. So those things are used to ground food. Now we also extended our survey to figure out, we were able to identify pretty quickly there was a fortress right here. And we mapped about 25 lookouts, a series of parapeted walls that allowed us to reconstruct the view shed and figure out that the people that basically built this advanced warning system to warn against invaders or attackers coming, especially from the north. Here's another slide that shows the extent of the defensive system, some weaponry. Those are 2 stone projectile points or daggers. You can see a lookout on the upper left. You can see a former doctoral student, Kimberly Monroe, is holding the scale rod here on a parapeted wall, right? A wall where, a bit like me here, standing on the parapet to throw stuff on the other side of the wall. All right. Now, for about 16 weeks at Kailan, we excavated. So if you're not familiar with archaeological excavations, that means that we basically, with a trowel usually or a shovel, we layer by layer remove the dirt, screen that dirt, collect all the artifacts or ecofacts or bits of animals or bits of plants, bag them, label them, bring them back to our field lab, clean them, draw them, weigh them, analyze them, et cetera, et cetera. And these are some of the photos of our collaborators. It gets pretty cold sometime, as you can see. All right, so with this information, we can reconstruct, for instance, the assemblage of people's kitchenware, what type of pottery they were using, based on the tiny bits, right? So we know, for instance, that the big spherical jars you see, that we call ollas sin cuello, or necklace jars, they compose about 70% of the assemblage. So most people were probably using those for multifunctional things, storage, cooking, whereas the stirrup spout bottles that you see, like here, for instance, which is like this stirrup spout bottle here, this is a replica. I'll pass it around. Don't break it, please. But it is a replica, it's okay. But and this is actually it's a replica more or less of the same period. So they really like these kind of thickened lipped, and it's very spherical, very monumental. We only have about 2% of our assemblage at Kailan that were bottles. So this is a very fancy type, probably to drink, in special occasions, maybe maize beer. It contains about 1.5 liter, which is kind of a lot. You don't really think when you look at it. All right, so I don't want to bother you with the carbon dates, but you still need to believe me. So there's 30 of those, and you can see that the sequence probably starts around 600 BC, maybe a bit earlier. By 400, we have a lot of dates, most of them clustered between 400 and 200 BC. Here. And then we only have one that is post 200, so maybe there was a late phase. But again, our sample is only 0.6%. So, okay. So what we did during our pedestrian survey and our capacity to map the entryways is we were able to delineate buildings that only had one access, right? So based on this, we're able to identify about 40, actually it's 43 compounds or cercaduras or walled enclosures that we think were residential, large residential complexes. They have letters here, and they are of different colors that are not green. The green buildings are the buildings that don't conform to the residential patterns. So they're either larger, they don't have the same spatial syntax. One is a fortress, one is just a weird building. It's just square with big square rooms. It could be, we did find at another site a camelid enclosure that looks very similar. So until we go excavate it, but that could well be a camelid. People kept llamas for caravanning and for food. That seems like these would be nice rooms for llamas to. And the major one we'll talk about is this thing here and this thing. So the big green one, number 2, is what we call the main platform complex, or it's basically a huge pyramid. And it's fronted by the only open space, so the only true plaza at the site, right? And what I'm suggesting to you today, and it's been published in many places, is this was the center of the civic life at the site level, right? So this was one level of supra-communal or site-wide, even probably valley-wide, because Kailan was the larger settlement within a system of many, many communities. So this is what that main pyramid or main platform looks like. We did a trench excavation in the middle there. And we found remnants of friezes. This was probably adorned on the outside, which is very different from the neighborhood. Cercaduras or walled enclosure pattern where the plazas are decorated inside. So they direct the decoration to visitors that are inside or residents that are inside. This one is broadcasting to the outside. This bit is a fallen step design, right? Hence, we can reconstruct the step design on top of the platform. We also found some remains of wall paint. All right, so the remainder of what I'll talk about for the rest of the talk are residential compounds. So they vary in size, but they all have the same spatial syntax or same spatial logic, right? So they all have a courtyard or an enclosed plaza. It's always the first space you walk into when you leave a street. You would walk into somebody's courtyard or somebody's plaza, think like your backyard, right? But it's not just your normal backyard. It always has a bench somewhere. And they really like to elevate themselves. So when they have visitors, they can be a bit higher up, right? And they build colonnades or columns to provide shade, and then maybe sitting on a chair or something. So this is the red bit in this compound called compound D, which you also saw the 3D, the SketchUp animation or reconstruction. And then the yellow bit is the living quarters or residential space. They're always located behind the plaza. So to get to the living quarters, you always have to go through the plaza, right? It's a bit like in your house, I suppose. Nobody's walking into your bedroom. They have to go through the living room first, right? All right, so what we did is we arbitrarily just divided we have 43 of those residential enclosures or compounds. We divided them by size. They could also be divided by number of subdivisions, but that's a bit less clear because sometimes the access ways are just a bit destroyed and it's not entirely clear. But by size, we got to 4 categories. One is extra large, is the miscellaneous category. They're basically more than 7,400 square meters. They're so huge that we have questions about them. They might be not too well preserved. Maybe we missed somewhere one blocked entrance or something. Who knows? The others, they range between roughly 700 and about 5,000 square meters. So we divided them by increments of about 2,000 square meters. What we do see is there's no kind of fall-off curve or linear relation between the distance between the focal node in the city, which is the Plaza Mayor, right, and the size of the residential group. So this is something that in urbanism we often use to see if there are social differences. You assume that maybe that the wealthier people might live close to the main area of the town, right, the epicenter, like say in Spanish colonial towns where wealthy families would live next to the Plaza de Armas, where the city council or the church would be, right? We don't seem to see this. It's actually quite the opposite. It's very linear for the small, medium, and large, and then the huge compounds are just farther away. So, but then still, if you look at their spatial organization by size, their plaza is always about a third, right, of the total surface area. So again, they don't seem to be broadcasting to show off and attract, people from outside. They seem to be building those to cater to their own needs as co-residents. All right, so for the rest of the talk, I'll talk about 2 excavations we did, one in a plaza at Compound A and one at a residential area, Compound E. So let's start with Compound A. So we dug in the opposite corners at Plaza A, and we found these friezes organized in these kind of step platforms, and people could go up through staircases, and they even decorated the columns. We found 2 renovation phases after the initial building phase, so they would basically build on top and build on top. Inside the fill, when they renovate their plaza, they basically dump the curated trash of feast activities, right? So they would have parties, drink a lot, eat a lot, break a bunch of stuff, including pen pipes, including bottles like these. People would lose their headdress, as you do, in a moment of inebriation, or they would maybe lose the feathers from their headdress, and that would end up in the fill of the walls. And that's what we tie to the use of the plaza. Now, what we found at Plaza A is also a lock system between the living quarter and the plaza. So not only were people concerned about keeping outsiders outside at the street level, but once you were inside their big homes, they also didn't want certain people, probably during, again, large gatherings, moments of inebriation, You can think, week-long festivals. You could lock yourself into your living quarter and leave all your distant relatives sleeping in the plaza, right? All right, so Compound E is where we dug the residential bits. So here, it's a smaller a little bit. I mean, it was easier for us because the walls were just not as high. And so we dug one of the sub-complexes, but it's the same spatial logic. You come in from the street, you're into the plaza, you're fronted by this raised platform. People were probably sitting there, the heads of the house. Right to the left, there's an annex, we call it. It doesn't connect with the rest of the compound. There's 3 bins. We think this was probably like a temporary kitchen. When they were using the plaza for large gatherings, they would have a kitchen next to the plaza. They wouldn't have to go back to their house, right? And then there's a corridor to the left of that platform that leads you to 2 sub-complexes. We sampled, better said, the southeast complex, right? So the gray areas are where we excavated. In the center of the patios, we found a bunch of things. For instance, you see my colleague Germán here cleaning what would have been a huge, probably a water storage pot that was built under the floor to keep water. Here you see a bunch of potholes or depressions where people remove the pots when they abandon the place, right? So that gray floor, all the depressions were filled by the yellow sand that flew in, right, with the wind. In another place, we found groundstones right in that gallery shaded area where people would have sat and grounded, chili peppers or manioc or... We can also look at the spatial syntax, reconstruct a little bit, how maybe it tells us or what it tells us about the social organization of this group. And we think these were probably 2 extended families that lived together in one big house, right? And we've done some demographic estimates based on this, and we extrapolated this to the architecture that is preserved at the site. And we think that maybe between 3,500 and 5,000 people lived in the urban core. That wouldn't include, the periphery or, yeah, all right. Just to wrap it up, so what we do know is that people gathered there maybe for 400 years. They were certainly resilient in times of conflicts. They sought to distance themselves from their neighbors, which probably tells us they were not used to living with their immediate neighbors. They were probably catching all that area that is about 100 square kilometers of people merging to defend themselves. So they have all these urban technologies to maybe slow the pace down of the city life, extend space, have these long corridors. We've worked on soundscapes. They're trying to isolate sound. And of course, they had lock mechanisms, et cetera, et cetera. So it might not be too distant from the concept maybe in mid-century America with, country houses, right? Where you try to extend space, have more privacy. In terms of governance or decision-making, there are certainly 2 clear levels that stand out. There's at the compound level. You can imagine heads of those big houses, maybe multiple extended families that had elders or particularly valiant warriors or capable weavers or agriculturalists or fisher who would, of course, congregate and discuss current affairs. They also had a site level area, the Plaza Mayor, the main temple, and we can imagine a back and forth maybe in terms of negotiation or consensus building between the different co-resident groups, right? Between these 40-ish groups where they would use these communal space to maybe share ideas, come back to their constituents, talk about what should we do with the defense system? What should we do with the irrigation, et cetera, et cetera. The site was ultimately abandoned probably between 200 and 100 BC. But I think we often, we're often city-centric and we work on a civilization or a culture, right? And we wonder why people abandon cities or sites. Or maybe the question here is more, why would people go crowd themselves, right? And maybe after a few centuries, when turmoil and tensions subsided, people just went back. They never kept having contact with the countryside, their farmstead, the hamlets where they came from. We know this, I didn't have time to talk about it, but we know this from the animal and the plant remains we find at Kailan. So people just went back to living in kind of slower settings, I guess. All right, so just to kind of summon Jennings once more, and I'll leave you go in peace. What archaeology has to bring is, of course, not a direct recipe to solve our problems today, but it's, instead of dismissing non-Western or ancient ways of doing things as mere curiosities, or maybe they can teach us about alternative ways to organize ourselves, whether it's for decision making or so Jennings talked about this in his book quite a bit. So I really want to emphasize that archaeologists, we never work alone. We always depend on teams. We never excavate site alone. I've been working with the community of Nepeña for many years, so I have to thank everybody there, all the local workers and archaeologists and students over the years. I've put a few photos here of different teams that came at different moments of the project. I also want to thank the different bodies that funded the Kailan project over the years. And well, thanks to you all for taking the time to being here tonight. And I would be happy to entertain any questions that you might have. Thank you so much. Is there anybody? Oh, yes, Alex, please go.
So that photo you said, what was the climate? So like, was it drastically different than now? Or is that maybe like a shrink or an expansion?
Yeah, that's a good question. Is my colleague Christine DeLong here? No. So this has been, so Alex is asking about the climate, the paleo environment, if it was the same back in the days as if it is today. And this has certainly been a major working hypothesis of archaeologists working on that time frame for the last 80, 70, 80 years. So we've kind of hypothesized a major El Nino. So, you've heard of El Nino, La Nina phenomenon, right? The disturbance of the atmosphere, the ocean in the Pacific, and that brings torrential rain in coastal Peru, followed by catastrophic droughts. And the problem is finding the empirical support for this. I've been working with Christine DeLong here in Geography and Anthropology, who's a paleoclimatologist, and we've worked with especially a graduate student that finished his PhD, Jacob Warner, on looking at bivalves, so basically small mollusk shellfish that we find in abundance at Kailan. I mean, people ate that every day. As proxies for paleo, like sea surface temperature, etc., that could help to reconstruct patterns of El Nino. As far as I know, what we know is that the El Nino were similar as today, but it's hard to pin and say, oh yeah, there's a major El Nino during, say, that decade, right? Now, it's different from later time periods. Like, for instance, there's a major El Nino that is well documented around 600 AD, but so yeah, the climate change hypothesis is, we'll get there. Yes, please, yeah.
Did you find some debris of food, like seeds, like water? Can you explain that?
Yes, so if we found debris of food, plant remains, seeds, etc. I came prepared. I did prepare slides for questions. So let me see. Try to jog my memory. I've been working on a new project since 2019. So the Kailan stuff is about a decade old in my mind, but I think we found, and these are just numbers, but it might give you a sense. So we found about 220 kilograms of shell remains. I think we found about 3.5 or 4 kilograms of animal bones. So those would be mostly vertebrates, mammals, birds, fish. And the weight of plant remains, I can't recall, but it doesn't tell you much because plants don't weigh too much. Now, we certainly did a lot of work on this. Actually, I don't know if Kenny Sutherland is here. He just finished his PhD last year in 2024, looking at trying to integrate multiple proxy lines. So what we call macroscopic plant remains, so things we can see with our own eyes without a microscope that we collect in the screen. So that would be, say, the seeds you see here, chili pepper seeds. We also, we were lucky enough to find 58 desiccated fecal samples. So basically, ancient paleo poop. We found people were using abandoned buildings as latrines, and we're able to collect those. They're not coprolized, they're not fossilized, they're not lithified. They're basically desiccated. So you would be surprised to know that the way to study desiccated feces is to rehydrate them. So you soak them for 3 days, and then you can go under the microscope and look at what's in there. So we've done that. We've also done some basic screenings. Now, the advantage in coastal Peru is that it's so dry that we can retrieve a bunch of stuff just by screening with various caliber of screens, right? Or number of screens. So I can't recall the numbers, but we have, tens of thousands of entries or data points for seeds or plant remains. So this is one example. This is from Compound E. These are 2 taxa, right? Chili pepper, capsicum, and corn, maize, right? Where you can see the distribution. Now you have to keep in mind that the excavation, right? They sampled little squares within those rooms. It's not a constant, continuous sampling, but it might give you a sense that maybe somebody was grinding chili peppers right there in the corner, right? And then this might have been a storeroom for maize, right? That little room. So that's the kind of thing we're looking at, right? In terms of the animal, so just to give you a very, very brief, clearly the plant taxa, maize, avocado, squash, tomatoes, chili peppers would be your default things that people might know. And there's a bunch of semi-wild fruits, trees that would, pacay, et cetera, that would grow around the settlement. Manioc is probably a big one, but it's really hard to preserve. Same thing with like potatoes, right? They just don't preserve very well. We have to look for starch grain. And then on the animal side, it's really a dual agrarian and maritime, marine subsistence strategy. So they import daily seafood, a lot of shellfish, a lot of marine fish. And then these are hard because, fish bones don't preserve too well. They're tiny. You have to use super small screens. But sardines and anchovies are probably your top candidates. People were probably putting that in stews. And then llamas and surprising, or guinea pigs are also probably, in terms of the mammals, the top in terms of animal being consumed. And then they also ate dogs, because we find quite a bit of dog bones with cut marks. So the question becomes, are dogs, we kind of alternate, are they famine food? Are they, prestige food? Is it something you give to an important person? Like, here's a dog. have a good time. Or is it, oh yeah, we're dying now, let's eat the dog. Come here, Rex. Yeah. But yeah, dogs were certainly butchered. Camelids were probably also not your top choice because they were really for caravanning. We've done some, you haven't asked, but I'll tell you. I collaborated with a geoarchaeologist who's now at Trent University in Peterborough in Ontario. And we've done some stable isotope analyses of camelid bones to see what they ate and if they traveled. And we can, with the signal in their bones, we kind of know a little bit if they had a coastal diet, a highland diet, if they were fed domesticated crops like maize, or if they just were browsing on their own, right? And there seems to be different patterns. We only sampled 19 from Kailan, 19 bones. But certainly they were going up and down the mountains, and there's a few specimens that looked like they were probably a bit more coastal. But it certainly tells us later on in prehistory, near the time when the Inca conquered the Chimu a few decades before the Spanish arrived, they really had coastal camelids, right? That really were bred on the coast. They were a bit different. Camelids, if you don't know, they originate from the highlands of Peru. They're wild grazers high up there, right? Yes, does that help? Yes, please.
Was there any evidence that this culture used coca leaves?
Well, coca, yeah, there is coca. Yeah, there's coca, quite a bit actually. Coca, I mean, it's hard, you know, I don't think they were growing it locally. They were certainly getting it through exchange networks. You know, coca, it likes sun, it likes water. So it grows in we call them yungas. There's these mid-elevation valleys that are about maybe 3 hours walk. Now the thing is, let me see if I can, where is it? There's quite a bit in there, but so this is kind of a settlement pattern map, maybe between 500 and 100 BC, right? And this was done by a colleague of mine, Hugo Ikehara, who was also my Peruvian co-director at Kailan for 2 years. But what we're basically finding is Kailan was probably the center of a lower valley system, right? With other sites that share the same material culture. They were probably trading. And again, this is where these big houses in the city, you know, they were not going to a market to buy stuff. They basically had members of their families that were fishing, that were farming, right? That was all part of their estates. Now, this Kailan system, you know, if we want to call it after Kailan being the largest settlement, it's very different from what is going on, you see, 6.5 kilometers, more or less, up valley, in the middle valley. And in between here, there's no sites of that period. So we think there's a buffer zone. And that's where we think aggressors are coming. And all of this to say that coca grows here. Now, it's not necessarily you know, indigenous from there, but it was certainly grown there at that time. And coca, if you don't know, is Erythroxylum coca is the Latin name. It's a very important crop in pre-Columbian Peru. It's a mild stimulant. People would chew it. It would give them, of course, it would stop hunger. You could go, you know, many hours with no meals and still harvest your potatoes or climb mountains. But it also gave courage. So this is, you know, the liquid courage of ancient Peru would be chewing courage. So before people went to battle, everybody chewed coca. It was a ritual crop too. People were carrying coca in a little bag. They carry the bag with them. When they die, they get buried with the bag with coca to make sure they have coca in the afterlife. But we see coca at Kailan. So, and we also see seafood up there. So what it basically tells us is that, yes, there might have been a buffer zone. Maybe conflicts were really about status quest, right? Wannabe warriors who want to display their courage by getting a captive, but maybe that most people were still trading stuff, right? Stuff moved around. So it's one of those things where some people have called it religious warfare. They think they're attacking, trying to destroy the oracle of a certain group, maybe your ancestral shrine, or there's a lot of we don't know. But coca was a thing, yeah. Tobacco was also a thing. Now, tobacco, tobacco because you smoke it, maybe it's bad for you. But also, tobacco is chewed, right? And tobacco shamanism was probably a big thing. It was a big thing and still is a big thing in the US Southwest and was a big thing in South America. So that's another thing. We have tobacco also, like kind of. If you don't know, I don't recommend, not that I've done it, but you drink it and then you pass out. And then your heart rate goes so slow that people think you're dead. And then when you come back to life, you typically, from what I've heard again, you see in black and white. And then the world is all ghosts, right? To the point where I have colleagues, archaeologists, we have a very fertile imagination. So my colleague, Hugo Ikehara, he, where is it? We've had questions about this feline here, right? So it's in the same building of super colorful murals, right? But this one, there's no color. So we thought maybe it's for like night rituals, right? Where the moonshine, and then you see it, the bright light, the bright white coming out. Maybe it was tobacco shamanism, where you would see, the whole point of shamanism, if you don't know, is to become something else, right? To transcend your own existence. In the Amazon today, it's all about becoming a top predator, typically a jaguar, or so maybe by becoming, a night vision tobacco shaman, you could maybe see these things, differently. But yeah, coca was maybe it's less visual and more like makes you feel strong. Today, it's mostly drank as tea to help with altitude sickness. But great question. Anybody else? Yes, please, in the back.
Was there ever any indication or evidence that led y'all to, understand what language they used at that time?
Oh my Lord, yeah. This is like the dreams of archaeologists. Yeah, we don't know. I'll give you the 40-second answer. The Inca, right? They moved in that region in 1470, more or less, right? And the Inca spoke Quechua, right? You might have heard of Quechua. It's an indigenous language today in the Andes. There's millions of people who still speak Quechua. Now, the Inca were not too interested in what people spoke in their homes, right? They just wanted people to pay their taxes, so they let people be. Now, the problem we have, and we know this because of toponyms, right? Like Kailan is not a Quechua name. There's a bunch of place names that are just not Quechua. Now, the problem we have is that the Spanish were not too interested either in learning about those non-Inca people, right? They wanted just to, trial Atahualpa, execute him, and move on with their business, right? And then, parcel out Peru into encomiendas, right? So there's a lot of that knowledge that was lost in the first decade of the colonial period. Now, linguists try to reconstruct this, and we know from place names, etc. There's many languages, Kuli, Muchik, Kinyam. We mostly go with place names, but like in Nepeña, for instance, where is it? I know this is, this slide was moved, sorry. Just look at this slide, right? Those are all just names of sites. Can you figure out different languages in there? Dr. Brody, you cannot answer. Well, maybe you see some Spanish, right? Like Partida, Blanco, San Isidro, right? Nuevo. So, there's some Spanish. There's also some Quechua, like Wambacho. Wambacho is a Quechua name. Now, we know the Inca were really interested in, again, taxing people. So not surprisingly, the Quechua name are near what is today the highway, right? The Pan American Highway, which again was only built in the 1970s, 1980s, but that's where the Inca went anyway, right? So there's Quechua names around here, but then, that's a Spanish name, Sugarloaf. Kailan is not a, Pañamarca, that's an Inca name. So there were probably a lot of people. But yeah, we don't know. Yeah, we don't know. But great question. Yes, was there something there? Or here, sorry.
So, are you having any trouble with getting funding for your graduate students?
Oh, yeah.
If so, what's affecting your research?
Well, yeah, I mean, I just wrapped up an NSF grant in 2022. So this was not at Kailan, this was at Cerro San Isidro. So we've been excavating there. So that was kind of, pre-pandemic. We were interrupted by the pandemic for about 2 seasons. Currently, I'm not in a expansionist stage, if you will. So we're kind of, we've put the fieldwork on pause and we're trying to deal with the data sets we have. So personally, it's not, but it is very unsettling, certainly, if, I'm thinking about going back to the field, or archaeology is teamwork, but it's also quite expensive, because we hire a bunch of people, we move a lot of dirt. If you don't know, everything we do, everything you've seen now is also backfilled, right? We don't leave anything out there to the elements, right? So that's a big part also. We have to consolidate if there are freezes, we have to hire conservators and build walls and reconstitute, and then we have to store all the materials, permitting, all these, like the 30 carbonates you saw, this is about, maybe $400 each analysis, right? So yeah, and then the big guns is when you start to bring out, isotope analyses and all of these other more specialized, but just even the basic travel funds to go to Peru, hire a local crew, maintain the relationships too. I mean, it demands going there regularly, right? Yeah, sorry. Hampton, yes, please. Thank you.
This really gives us some detailed information about a long time ago in this part of the world. And most Americans weren't educated about this. Could you give us some kind of idea when roughly the time period of the origin of civilization began?
Well, this is so the time frame of the origins of civilization in the Andes. It's all about perspective, isn't it? What is a civilization? So, I mean, for a very, very long time, like say until the 90s, 80s, 90s maybe, the murals I've just shown you, those things, the Chavin phenomenon, that was seen as the earliest civilization because we found a temple called Chavin de Huantar in the highlands of Peru. What we found, the locals knew it was there, archaeologists found it, and especially, where is he? Julio Tello, right there in the middle. And I don't want to make too long of a story, but at the time this was all in the infancy of Americanist archaeology, and the big debate was whether or not ancient civilizations came from Mesoamerica or the Indies or ancient Egypt, and who came first, right? And Tello, who was from the highlands of Peru himself, after documenting Chavin and finding the Chavin art style all over Peru, said, well, this is all nonsense. Look, right? There's ancient sites that go back thousands of years. So maybe we have to stop thinking about those ultra-diffusionist model. Chavin became the mother culture, right, of Peru, La Cultura Madre, right? And it was really anchored in this idea of monumental architecture, trade networks, fancy art. And then come the 1990s, and we discovered much more ancient sites, right, that existed before pottery was ever made. So we call that the pre-ceramic period. They go back 5,000 years ago. And they also built pyramids. And then that became, this is the origins of Indian civilization. And they were by the sea, and they did not have agriculture, and they built temples. Does that answer your question? We could be here all night with that. Well, thank you so much. Before, I know there's 1 minute left, because I did bring it, so you have to see it. We talk about warfare. I showed you the projectile points and things that don't preserve that, when you're lucky, you find, or where did it go? Can you make it? Okay, can that? Yeah, all right. So, can you? I'll put it. It's all right. It's all right. So this is a woven Andean sling that people still use today. They go to lagoons and they skip rocks, or they might throw rocks at each other sometimes. But this is to swing like this, right? And then you release, and then the rod goes that way, right? Now we think this is probably what people were using 3,000 years ago. I haven't found at Kailan a sling, but at San Isidro, the new site I'm working at, we found the remain of a sling. You can see this is the finger thing there. Now we don't know how old it is, but it was right there underneath the rock. Somebody dropped their sling. The bit that was at the surface all just disappeared with the sun, and the bit that was under the rock was just preserved as if you would pick up, like 100 years ago. If you ever want to try the sling, just stick around. We'll try not to injure anybody. But...
Thank you, David. That was great. So my take home is don't poop in abandoned buildings, because some archaeologists in the future will be judging you based on how much chili pepper and chocolate you have. So another round of applause for David. So tonight's lucky winners for the Campus Federal umbrella that Holly Kruth there is holding up, I guess that's the first person, is Luis Escobar. Luis, you here? Luis Escobar? If not, it's going to go to the WRKF winner, if that's okay. Which is, I knew it was rigged, Wissam Jawad has won the umbrella and the WRKF. All right, Wissam. Many thanks to Holly Kruth, who's also handing out that umbrella. So Holly makes this run. Many thanks. ORED, the Office of Research and Economic Development in the President's Office, helps pay for the food and this venue. Thanks to the varsity for hosting us here. Clap, you can clap for the varsity. Jacob is the bartender who made our drinks tonight, so don't forget to close out and tip him. Maddie, the manager of the varsity, who helped everything that's involved with this, so thanks, Maddie. So the next LSU Science Cafe will be Tuesday, May 27th. It's always the last Tuesday of the month, where archaeology professor Helena Mora Fitz will discuss her research. So thank you for attending tonight. That was great. Thank you.